Broadcasting from our station, spinning 3,900 feet above the watery sphere.
I can see for miles and miles. I can see for miles and miles. I can see for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles.
This is Monitor Duty. Well, how about that? Welcome to the new year, ladies and gentlemen. We are.
It feels like just last year was 2025.
It was. It was. In fact, it was like, what? A week ago?
Right?
Week and change?
It's
Something?
like you leave 2024 for a lousy 365 days and they change everything.
Okay, so I have a confession to make on this subject of absolute nonsense. I have yet to try to write the date on anything yet this year. It just
yes,
hasn't
that's
come up
always
for
fun.
me. So I keep dreading that I'm going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Especially because my new boss every day makes sure to mention that. And I'm like, now I'm terrified. It's like just started this new gig, and I'm like, man, the weights of the date seems really heavy on me, I guess. I don't know.
There
I've
I
gotten it
go,
wrong
writing
in
BC
typing.
instead of AD again.
But it's a lot easier to get it wrong in typing, even if you intend to get it right, because
Yeah.
every year the next number is literally just right next to it on the keyboard, and you can
Yes.
accidentally fat finger the last one.
So what did everybody, before we dive into today's topic, which is the New Yorker and how the New Yorker ruined comics.
I
Which
knew
is,
you were going to say that.
listen, well, it's in the title of the video. I typed this up when I titled this show all these weeks ago, right? I titled the show, and my son, Taliesin, he says, really? Is it that bad? And his mother says, it's clickbait, honey.
Yeah,
At this
that's
point,
crazy that-
you just need to create a playlist that's X ruins comics, because it's just like a
Maybe.
brand thing at this point.
That would be a great playlist.
That is kind of why I leaned into it. I don't
Yeah, no, that's great. No, it's good branding.
and I don't necessarily disagree with that either. We'll talk about that more later. But before we get into that, just a little. I haven't seen you guys. Some of you
Since
ever,
last
but I
year.
mean, even virtually for a while. How was everyone's Christmas?
Wonderful as
Christmas
usual,
happened?
actually.
Yes, Christmas happened. In fact, it happened twice.
It happened for the last 2,000 years, mostly.
Well, that too, but
Oh my
there's
gosh.
Western Christmas and there's Eastern Christmas.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, that would have been yesterday, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yep. Anyhow, but yeah, so that's the ticket. So that was my joke. But yeah, no, my son was back from law school for a little while, and we got to hang out. It's been really fun, and I know you guys out there in the internet land, you might have missed the show. Tough. I was doing more important things like playing board games and talking about, movies and stuff. So that was my thing. But I found it. I had a very restful holiday. So I'm feeling really good about things. But today,
My wife bought me. Wait a minute, you didn't.
sorry.
You asked how Christmas went. You haven't shut
I know.
up.
I got ahead of it again. Sorry.
Okay.
I wasn't
don't-
really
I don't-
interested in the
I
answer.
don't like to interrupt, but there's never an opening. It's like, anyway, my wife bought me the Babylon 5 on Blu-ray box set, which is really nice because I wouldn't have pulled the trigger. I've wanted it for a long time, but I've already got it on DVD, so I couldn't buy it for myself, And she bought it for me, and it's like, thank you, because I wouldn't have gotten it. So that's what I got for Christmas. I mean, I got other stuff too, but we lost somebody already.
Yes,
Lost
we
my
did.
list. Well, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. I was just
No,
I
you're
was
fine.
waiting for the moment, and it's like, oh wait, now I'm stepping on your intro. Go
That's
ahead.
fine. Please
Go ahead.
step away.
Oh, so we've got a new viewer in the form of Cookie here.
So, yes. So, Witless is back. You're back.
That's what I get for trying to sign in.
Well, we appreciate you returning for sure. How was your Christmas? I imagine it was a little different for you.
I read this homework that we're about to talk about.
For 2 weeks?
Well, you know me, like I always have to try and read more.
Oh, that's
So
true.
yeah, so I
Just reading like the entire backlog of the New Yorker.
No, I wish I had time to do that. I just read the introduction to the Ing book, which actually I think helps form at least my introduction to the topic.
Yes. Yeah. And in our private chat, when I was sharing the link, I misattributed a thing. I said angle instead of ing. I was typing while I was on the way to a place, and I got the letters mixed up in my head. Super embarrassing. And then I was going to go back and correct myself, and then you know what? I forgot. But we are talking about the New Yorker. Now, those of you out there in the world might not know about magazines, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to say New York.
Like if you watch this show, I think everyone you know what the New Yorker is, even if you don't know it, your brain does.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
They know of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know anybody who's ever read the New Yorker, but they know of it.
Right. So the New Yorker was a magazine. Started publishing in 25, something like that. 32. I don't remember. Somewhere back in the before I was born times, and it was a cultural commentary that was supposed to encapsulate the metropolitan idea, right? Arts and culture and politics, and thought leading of the metropolitan East Coast, and it also kind of didn't invent, but it subsumed. No, that's not the right word. The work on the New Yorker kind of created the epitome of the one panel comic, right? And kind of finessed and distilled the one panel comic to a huge audience.
Oh yeah, because it kind of evolved out of the political cartoon that had been going around since right around the 1700s, but it did really just like a pop flash thing that happened here or there, and they kind of just capitalized on it fully and went full into the one panel comic.
Yep. And also like a lot of really mass popular cartoonists, Charles Adams, James Thurber.
Thurber's the one that I especially recognize because he ends up he shows up in literary anthologies and such.
Thurber wasn't just a cartoonist, right? He did cartooning and he did prose writing and he did reporting, and he was kind of a jack of all literary trades.
Secret Life of Walter Mitty is probably the one that people would remember, but I remember him from The Catbird Seat, which is a wonderful little short piece. But I would also mention that in the article we read today by Ing, he kind of describes how the New Yorker, while maybe not creating it, was definitely along for the ride for some of the nascency of the newspaper strip and essentially the language of the comics medium, really. Because in some of those earlier sometimes we call them proto comics, but you had the some of the political pieces that you can see all the way going back to when they were fighting Tammany Hall, and even before that, you could see like even I think you can see stuff that's even is it Revolutionary War, and it's like the political commentary essentially, and they would sometimes have word and image, but they hadn't quite figured out exactly how those two things were going to interact with each other yet.
Yeah, like the image for the Gaston flag is kind of a proto comic, and a lot of people attribute that to political cartoons.
Right. Yeah. So the New Yorker is part of that journey where it's like, okay, we figure out, and some of the chapter that we read by a scholar named Ing, INGE, we read a chapter from Comics as Culture, and some of what's happening in there is essentially, I think it was the editor, was it? Had a very particular eye for comics in particular, and was part of, like I said, maybe not the only contributor, but one of the contributors who helped establish, okay, here's how much text we're going to put in a one-panel comic. Here's how we're going to represent it. One of the things that was discussed is in previous attempts, I guess, in previous versions of this type of artistic expression, you have this, and you can see this in lots of other early newspaper strip comics where they haven't quite figured it out, and things end up being a little clunky, maybe a little bit awkward. In some of the versions, they would almost list it like a script, like character name and then what they said, character name and what they said, is a version of doing that. And when you get to the New Yorker, they start to whittle it down to being able to, for the reader to be able to understand at a glance, like right here, without it having to say a tag or even a speech balloon, you know who's speaking and what they're saying, and you just like intuitively grasp that. And that's something that we commonly just expect out of comics. We just know that's how they're supposed.
Captions only.
We know that's how it's supposed to be, but that's not how. That was not a always a given. It's something that had to be learned. It had something that had to be taught. It had to be something. It had to be discovered how to do that. And so part of the New Yorker's contribution is helping to establish that. So it's I think it's a guy by the name of Ross. I think is what they attribute.
Harold Ross, who was the guy who kind of created the prospectus that became the New Yorker. He was one of the first whatchamacallits, editors.
So Harold Ross is one of the ones who so what's interesting, like I said, is that the New Yorker is part of comics history, not just in terms of being an artifact from that history, but part of the development of the medium itself. And so some of the things that you read when you read, like, for example, like The Far Side, who's obviously a great one-panel comic, my favorite one-panel comic example, but some of the things that we just take for granted in the medium. And you can also see this in other examples like Winsor McCay, when he figures out how to do dialogue balloons as opposed to just putting gobs of text at the bottom of the page. But the New Yorker is part of comics history and contributed to the development of what we see today.
And I do have I went through and selected a huge number of what you call it, panels. I'm just flipping through this little slideshow of a whole bunch of different New Yorker comics that just tickled my fancy as I was going through it. So hopefully they are a lot long enough to kind of get the appreciation for it. Now, the thing about that I absolutely love about it, and one of Ross's real motivations was to have this, real punch, real solid hits with these comics, so that they are readily accessible, and that was to reflect this hustle and bustle of the big city, right? But what it ended up doing is it ended up creating a format that was adaptable by other newspaper comic things that had a widespread appeal and taught comics literacy to people, right? The idea that comics kind of have their own language, and this fermented and distilled this comics language for a wide populace. And in comics became a part of and grew up as part of an intrinsically and inextricably part of the 20th century American concept of themselves, right? And they were in all newspapers, and they were in of course magazines and all that kind of stuff too. Even though the New Yorker was supposed to have a very specific audience that wasn't this wide audience, it still was a part of that. And that's one of the things that I find so fascinating, is how that the New Yorker became a breakout, a proving ground for these mass media artists when their stated mission was not as broad of a mass media, right? They weren't talking to me out in flyover country, which comes to one of my favorite New Yorker covers, which is in there. And it was the cover that I used for the image of theirs, the view from New York, a picture of America from New York City, which if it comes back around here, I'll pause on it because I find that hilarious.
Again, one thing I love to point out in some of these is that some of the techniques that we see are just, the actor who's actually speaking in those comics is very clearly speaking or is gesturing or is positioned in a way that we just intuitively grasp that that's the person speaking. We don't need the tag. We don't need something at the bottom that tells us who is speaking. And again, this is one of those things that the New Yorker helped develop, which again I think a fascinating bit of comics history. Again, we just take so much of it for granted, but if you go back to, say, again, older proto examples, they did, these things had to be workshopped.
Yeah, and this is like very recent memory too, to be like living in a time that is so close to this. This will probably all be forgotten one day. It'd be like when we go to an old Latin kind of like text just chiseled onto a wall, and you see that there's no spaces or punctuation between anything. You're like, this is going to be a pain to decipher. But people living at the time, they would have just like read through it and knew exactly what it said. That's probably how people are going to see some of these older comic things if you give enough time in between it.
Can you stop it on the shoe salesman one? It goes by so fast.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and.
Speaking of art,
first of all, let's pause this. This was the one I was talking about. Quick, you've got New York City, the Hudson River, and then everything is put together here. Now, one of the hilarious aspects about this here is that like the map is totally wrong, right? So you've got Chicago and Kansas City in parallel with each other, Nebraska to the west of Kansas City, like Utah should be up here, Las Vegas is over here.
It doesn't matter to them, though. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and that's part of the joke is how wrong it is, and it's the perfect summation of this urbanite attitude toward things.
Yeah,
I love it.
Moscow on the Hudson actually kind of stole. I don't know if they stole it; they parodied it, and the creator of the original cartoon kind of sued them, and they couldn't use it anymore because that was the cover. Was that it was very similar to that drawing, but then it kind of emphasized Russia at the top, where it goes across the Pacific, and then there's Russia there because Robin Williams' character comes from Russia in that movie. So
I missed it.
The shoe salesman one, it goes
you
by
just
there.
passed right by it again.
Yeah, you just went by it. There it is. Yeah, he's pulling out a gun. It goes by so fast they couldn't really see what he's doing.
That's hilarious.
It's just great.
It's easy to miss because like a
Isaac,
stiletto already almost looks like a gun.
Right.
Isaac Larkin in chat says, have any of you thought to submit a panel to the New Yorker? If not, what would yours be? Or if so, I'm assuming, if you were to submit a New Yorker comic.
Well, maybe it's if
never
not,
considered
because if you had thought about it, you probably already
okay.
submitted it already.
Yeah. Well, and in the day, New Yorker, I believe, is still being published. I don't think it's but back in the day, you could submit them, but now they go through literary agents. They've really closed the window on who they'll accept.
Partly why part of the conversation, I'm assuming, today.
Yeah, well, and the other part of it too is even then it was a situation where they were very choosy with who they'd pick, and they were open for submissions, but they would seek out and headhunt the specific artists that they wanted in there. And then if you didn't make if you can get above their favorites, then you got in. And a lot of people did too. I mean, I'm not trying to bemoan that, but
well, it's even worse for all forms of submission publication than it used to be. The internet's kind of changed that. There used to be plenty of journals and magazines, smaller ones that would take open submissions, and of course they would still be choosy about which ones they would publish. But if you were to say a short story writer or anything along the means, you could always find somewhere to start getting published so you could get credits on your name. Not so much these days. There's less magazines because less people are buying them, less publications in general, and you kind of need an agent to get into almost anything. And that's probably why most people have just resorted to putting blogs and stuff up, which feeds back into the cycle of, well, all those blogs and stuff are why there's less magazines at the same time. It's just a dying medium.
Mm-hmm.
Ing says something, I'm assuming, that encapsulates Reese's opinion. This is on page 115 of the reading of the homework we were assigned. I will direct you to a quote from Ing where he says, some, however, feel that the first 25 years were the best for the New Yorker, and that now the magazine has settled into a comfortable routine that is all too predictable and only smugly humorous. And Ing's chapter essentially covers the fact that when Ross began, he was innovating. People were not used to this, and that it was fresh off the presses in a way. He created a kind of register essentially, and then innovated a great deal with some very top talent who did very, like I said, innovative things in cartooning for the time. Like I said, and I've mentioned before what some of those innovations were. But then after that first 25 years, settled into this routine that has now become, I guess the ungenerous way would be to say smug elitism. And I think that would be the criticism. You can take it from here for Reese, but I'm assuming that the criticism here for why the New Yorker ruined comics would be lay in that direction.
Well, that would be part of it, right? Definitely an aspect of it but the thing is that smug elitism was kind of baked in, right? And this is specifically what I mean, right? During the 60s, I don't know if it was after Ross had left the New Yorker altogether, but the comics guy became a guy named William. The editor was a guy named William Shawn, right? And when and he was an absolute elitist, and he did a few things to actually limit the circulation of the New Yorker because of the success of the comics. It was getting a wider audience, and like the rubes were reading the New Yorker. And when Charles Addams got the deal for the Addams Family TV show, Shawn forbade the Addams Family comics and those whole cast of characters from showing up in any New Yorker book until the guy died in like 87, right? So the whole time Shawn was at the New Yorker from 64 to 87, the Addams had stories that were published in that. I mean, he had comics that were published in that time frame, but none of them were the Addams Family stories because those had gotten public and those had gotten gauche, and they weren't allowed to be seen and to be associated with the prestigious elite attitude on it, right? But the thing is that comics had evolved into this. The thing that frustrates me is comics, including one panel comics, had evolved to be this common language that everybody was participating in, right? And the thing about the New Yorker comics, Addams Family, and there was another cartoonist who was a female cartoonist who did a lot of similar, like Tales from Suburbia kind of of comics, of strips, but they were all like this the poking fun at and participating in this broadening middle class existence, where the middle class and the nouveau riche and the old money were like values were clashing during the early and mid 20th century. And those were themes that were resonating with New Yorkers and with the suburbanites and those, out in bedroom communities and all that kind of stuff. And so it's so funny to me. And when I say New Yorker ruined comics, it was part of this idea that, there was this attitude that, our comics are better than your comics. And a lot of academics bought into it, even though they were speaking the same comics language.
I'd like to clarify a few points here to avoid maybe some conflations. That I think there's a few distinctions that should be made, and that doesn't negate anything you've said, but I think it might help us clarify some of the discussion here. The first thing I want to point out, and this is something that I think is very fascinating about what Ing is doing and some other people that you had us read, I think including MC Gaines, who is like, without him he was actually, the piece that you had us read from MC Gaines was really interesting because for someone who kind of was one of the unarguable fathers of comic books as actually pamphlets, he was pretty circumspect in how he actually discussed his own contribution to I printed the first comic book. So he was very modest. But some of our reading today was not just Ing, it was some other pieces. Like I said, we read some MC Gaines. Also talk about some of the history of cartoons and comics. The distinction I want to make is exactly that, which is although there is no functional difference in a, I guess, literacy sense between comics and comic strips, there is a big publishing and cultural difference between the two. Or at least there's a difference that has grown over time. Now that difference has been an evolving one. Stan Lee used to call his superhero comics, he called them strips, he called them mags, because that was the language of the time. It was a comic strip, it was a magazine, that's what you called these things. Over time, they became and grew into just being a kind of distinct thing that, like I said, even though they structurally, in a literacy sense, are the same, still have very, very different cultural ramifications to them. Why this is important? This is important because of what we read from an academic point, the elitism conversation, and where we are today. There is a big difference between comic strip and comic book. Cultural difference.
Yes.
Not a big structural one, but there's a huge cultural difference that has evolved over time. And I'll just very briefly outline a couple of markers for why this is, or kind of how this kind of plays out. So when Superman, again, 1938, Siegel and Schuster make the first superhero, probably the most important one, Superman, their goal was to not publish comic books. The prize that they wanted and did eventually get was a daily Superman strip, because what they saw as legitimate publication was in fact showing up in newspapers. That was what the target was. The cartoon syndicate over time at different times has actually had a lot of power, a lot of legitimacy, a lot of envious prestige to be had. You wanted to be a syndicated cartoonist. That was a mark of cultural and financial stability and legitimacy. That is no longer the case. Where we are today, the inverse has happened. I was recently at a comic book convention. I was at Heroes Con. The guy who did Foxtrot was there, and he was basically forgotten in a sea of other media.
Which is unfortunate, because Foxtrot it's
a good comic. No, I'm not arguing.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. Yeah. I mean, not every strip is great, but it's great.
But I'm pointing out the fact that these power dynamics inverted at a certain point. Superman became way more culturally relevant than the cartoon, than the newspaper strips. However, the academic and cultural legitimacy remained very different. So you had this moment where people like Charles Schultz and Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes would poo-poo and from their ivory towers and look down on Superman and the Spandex Brigade, because that was low art. And the comic strips were high art. Now, this is what makes this fascinating.
That's crazy.
This is where things get very interesting, and this is where I'm actually going to slightly defend the New Yorker and its elitism, although I'm not a big fan of it. I will defend it on the fact that the New Yorker and comic strips were able to attain, for the medium of comics, enough cultural capital to be able to have elitism from the New Yorker type audience signifies that the medium gained something. It gained purchase in elite circles. You could be smart and elitist and look at some of these New Yorker comics and look down. The fact that there is a form of comics that can look down on something it signifies that comics as a medium achieved something through this that they never really managed to get in the comic books themselves. And so the New Yorker existing is a signifier of that cultural prestige. And so I think that is a notable aspect that they have. I think it's complicated, but I don't. That is my defense for why they didn't ruin comics. They're a necessary marker in the fact that comics actually have some measure of cultural influence.
Right, and I think that's a entirely valid argument. Click bait aside, right?
Yeah.
Um, because one of the things is like the New Yorker and newspaper strips as a whole, they did have this purchase, and like one of the other of my recent purchases, and I've not finished reading it, but I did the epilogue to this book here, the Comics: An Illustrated History of Comic Strip Art by Jerry Robinson of Robin and the Joker fame, right?
Mm-hmm.
He by the 1970s, he was a syndicated comic strip artist and a professor of comic strip art at a New York university. He was teaching comic art at the collegiate level in the 70s.
But it is important to point out that while you old fogies, Hutch and Reese, while you guys were reading your comic books, the comic strip people were looking down. Like I can point to citations where there are actual strips. Calvin and Hobbes would do this all the time, but they would also do it in the other strips as well, where they would mock the comic books. That's low art. That's trash. What we in the newspapers, with our particular New Yorker register, the cleaner lines, the less cluttered pages, are very simplified art style. We are the voice of cartoon culture.
If I may interject there for a second,
please.
Was Calvin and Hobbes really mocking anything? Because you saw the lengths he went to learn how to draw exactly like it.
He's making he likes action stuff. I think he respects people like Hal Foster and the like. He has almost no respect for the contemporary superhero artists. Right. Whenever he draws anything close to that, it's very much in mockery.
Yeah, and he's also pulling off of the similar art styles, because like the thing is, comic book art styles were not divorced from newspaper strip art styles entirely. Although I do agree that people would hold that opinion, Twitless. But if you look at like Sally Forth, or if you look at the Phantom, right,
which is another style
right, or Rex Morgan MD, they're not drawing that different from the stuff you're getting every month in the Flash, or under Carmine Infantino or John Broome, right? And you have so you have these people that were there's a similarity in complexity, and even you're talking about the clean, uncluttered page, but you look at Terry and the Pirates or Prince Valiant, right, where there's so much detail in the Prince Valiant strip.
Sure, I guess, but again, that's
only this big on the page is a crime. It's a crime.
But that's Foster, right? And Foster makes it into a veritable painting.
Right.
And so, like I said, I love superhero artists. I will defend them to the death. But the perception of the people who were poo-pooing, they clearly were saying this is pop trash, and what we're doing is culturally significant.
And it seems to be particularly aimed at specific stuff like the superhero things, because like if you roll back, there's not tangibly that much of a difference between strips and the earliest form of comic books, because a lot of early comic mags literally were just reprints that were collected.
Yeah. Right.
What's funny is there's at least one exception to this, and that is Bill Keane, the writer of Family Circus, who of course in turn is also the father of Glenn Keane, one of the most famous Disney animators. Glenn talks about how his father never considered himself a true artist. He'd always say, "I'm a cartoonist." Glenn, you can be so much more.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a continuum here, but I'll definitely say that there's like a lot of examples where I think where you can find that both in the people reading them, and I think in the people even making them, and in the money and the prestige that they got, and in the prestige that the comic book people wanted, that there was there was a stratification here, and the New Yorker is part of that comic
absolutely. Yeah.
strip family, and they're at the upper echelon of it in a lot of ways.
See, and that comes back to, like, more of what I'm trying to say, and I may not have said this earlier, because I don't disagree with your perspective at all. But my thing is that this attitude of pretension, right, is by and large just hypocrisy, because they're doing the same things, many of them with the same level of skill, but because it's coming on a saddle stitched, then they can just disregard it, right? And it's the same people that had, and the another aspect of this is New Yorker writ large also had massive disrespect for the audience of the Saturday Evening Post, even though they're dealing with like the same kinds of content for different audiences, right? And the level of people producing art for the Saturday Evening Post is in many ways, I would argue, superior to what the New Yorker was putting out.
Well,
but
I mean,
technically, and if nothing else.
What's his? Oh gosh, I always have trouble remembering his name.
Which one?
Only one of the most famous American painters ever. Hold on, I'll have it in a second.
Rockwell?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, right.
Darn it. That always
I
happens.
mean, Rockwell and Leidecker were both huge names in with Saturday Evening Post stuff, and they're both just some remarkable painters.
Jim Tuner says Calvin and Hobbes is the last person to be critical of comics because his work was more comic book than comic strip. I think that for Bill Watterson, if I can address that comment, I think he objected more to. There's a sense that there's definitely a cynicism towards popular culture that pervades Calvin and Hobbes. I think he may have objected more to the content than just the form, but the idea that like you have these people in tight spandex, the sort of sexualization aspect to it, and then the general either literacy of them and like the violence in them, just the preoccupation, the less. He judged them. It's clear as day. it's very, very obvious.
Well, and it's one of those things too. Sorry to step on you there, Cartoonicus, but it's also one of those things too where one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century, Agatha Christie, right, whose prose is at times florid, but is also like sharp and piercing, and never gets credit for being, or especially during her life, seldom got credit for being a good writer, because it was popcorn fluff for stay-at-home moms, right? And but I mean, her work's literary. It's crafted very well. It just was also formula fiction. And that's not I wouldn't argue is necessarily a bad thing.
No, I love Watterson. I'm just like I said. I detect it's pretty obvious.
He's
pretty clear. He's
critical person in general.
He's pretty cynical about contemporary culture, specifically the Saturday morning cartoon level stuff.
So, Cartoonicus, you were going to say?
Well, I was just noticing, thinking about how Bill Watterson had such a short run compared to others. And all my life, I've just always been told, he just got tired of it and decided he wanted to do something else. But I don't know, what if there was something about the culture of newspaper comic strips that he actually got sick of? Maybe he didn't like superheroes, but maybe he also didn't like the world he was in either.
He always
definitely pushed against the syndicate.
I was going to say, always pushed against. Like he fought to get his Sunday space.
That's
right. There was a lot of fight. Anyway, I don't want to divert things too far into Calvin and Hobbes. It's just illustrative of these conversations between comics and comic strips, or cartoons. Some people would even say I'm a cartoonist as opposed to a comic book artist.
Well, right, and note how that's what I was saying about Bill Keane. His son grew up to be an animator. That means he is a cartoonist. What he was clearly saying when he says, I'm just a cartoonist, was I'm just a little newspaper comic writer.
Yeah. So, like I said, there is definitely layers to this. But what I'm trying to ultimately point out here was that comic books were seen on the bottom. They've almost always been seen on the bottom, even when compared to comic strips.
By any chance, does part of that have to do you think, with, what do you call it? Just, primetime syndication, as opposed to, here's this one artist who's going to create this one single work of art, and then you're never going to see that again, versus, those people are just mass producing this pop culture stuff over here.
Well, I think that was I think you may be onto something as far as people's perception of it, but the problem that I have is that when you look at comic strips, as a whole, and that is what they do. It is just cranked out, pop culture schlock. And a lot of times, I mean, you've got great stuff that's intermingled in there, but Garfield is Garfield for a reason. You know what I mean?
So is Charles Dickens, though. That's the funny thing is you take it all the way back to her serialized fiction. What people will study today in English classes is the exact same thing. They just did it with words as opposed to, and actually some of the Crookshank, which is often seen as a precursor to some of the comic art we have, is again right alongside Dickens, and it was serialized weekly stuff you picked up. It was the pop culture trash of its day.
Flash fiction.
So was Shakespeare, by the way. So it's just you just add enough time to it, and people go, "Well, that was really literary." So.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
Here's the irony, though.
I got to push back on the Shakespeare comment. Well, I'll you go first, Cartoonicus. So.
Well, I was just gonna point out, it's like the reason I wanted to ask that was because the incredible irony would be that the New Yorker eventually led to the rise of Charles Addams, and Charles Addams gave birth to the Addams Family, which is now a major mass-produced conglomerate thing.
Mm-hmm.
If they had known back then what they were creating, right?
Yeah. I think there's some of that aspect. The other thing is you look at Thurber, and many of his works were published in the New Yorker, both his comics and fiction, and that became the foundation of movies as well. I mean, Thurber in the middle of the 20th century, especially, was just wildly popular. I was familiar with his comics, even though I never read a New Yorker when I was small. His stuff was everywhere and reprinted in Reader's Digest and all kinds of stuff still. So,
there, stop that one.
Missed it. Hang on, I'll go back to it. But the thing about the one thing I want to talk about, I want to push back on the
Sorry, I'm not trying to derail things with the Shakespeare comment. I was just pointing out the fact.
No.
Largely
I agree,
speaking, we look back and.
But there is something to be said for that, right? And the survivorship bias is a factor in it. But one of the things that when it comes to Shakespeare, first of all, he was definitely producing pop art, right? But it was pop art that was informed and reflected upon the past knowledge that people already had, and also transformed it and projected something into the future. So it's not just time. Right? There's
that's fair. That's fair. I mean, I was definitely rage baiting that point.
That's fine. And not every one of Shakespeare's plays is as good as other Shakespeare plays.
Yeah, they can't all be Titus Andronicus.
Right. And they can't all be Hamlet. They can't all be the Twelfth Night. Or maybe other people don't like Twelfth Night as much as I do. Anyway, but some are just dumb funny, like Comedy of Errors is just it could be a Will Ferrell picture.
But to bring it back here though, I think it's interesting to see, and again, this is one of my defenses of the New Yorker, is the fact that its position in smug elitism, as annoying as it is, and as Reddit tier as it's become today, and that's I think part of the thing that's become some of the New Yorker. There's a recent one. I might look it up if I can. There's the one, I think it was COVID era, and everything in COVID era got insufferable.
It was so bad. I actually read. I was looking at a couple of COVID era New Yorker strips to try to put into this compilation. They were so bad.
Okay, so what I'm thinking of. Let me see if I can find it. It's the one with the. It's the passengers on an airplane. Let me see if I can find it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where they say. It has to do with people being like skeptical, and it's like, those of you who think they can fly the plane better, you're better than the experts, right? And so it was making fun of the people who didn't follow the experts' advice during COVID, and so they use the metaphor of the airplane to be like, "Oh, you think you know better than the pilot?" So like that's this. Oh, I found it. Okay.
Excellent.
Let me see. Here we go. Let me open this a new tab. And I'll share it real fast.
I'll let you know, I can fly a plane really well. It's landing it that's the problem.
Yeah, I have had some experience flying and none landing. this is a situation I have been in.
Seriously, I'm the only person here who's ever landed a plane.
So it appears.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the one I'm talking about. This is what the new when people I think Reese's Ragebait comment definitely ties in with the New Yorker as of today, which was when they turn out strips like this, and that elitism becomes not just a comment on cultural foibles, it becomes an indictment of I'm Reddit tier smarter than you, dumb Americans.
Right.
And that's the elitism takes on a different tenor at that
Well,
point.
and that's one of the things that like I really appreciate about Adam's work, right? Is that he pokes fun at everybody. Like he pokes fun at the New York elites, but also the rubes from the country, right? And it's just like, we're all goofy in our own way. And I don't mind that, but don't tell me I suck first thing in the morning. You know what I mean?
Hutch, you've been kind of
He had to take off.
leave? Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
I was
he
gonna
had to
say.
take off.
He's been
He
real
put it in the
quiet
private
because
chat,
he's
but
not
he
here.
had to take off.
All right.
So he thought he might have to he had some stuff coming up that he didn't know if
Gotcha.
it was going to wait till for the
And
time.
he didn't really have too much to say on the subject.
I was just about to
anyway,
ask him.
so-
I wanted to also say something else about the reading here, which is the fact that not only is the New Yorker a cultural artifact, but the readings you gave us are cultural artifacts.
Yes.
There's also a commentary on how far comics have come as not just a art form, but as a field of study. Ing's Comics' Culture that we just read, it predates. Well, it comes out. It's published in I think 1990, like on the dot, if I'm not
I believe
mistaken.
90. Yep.
It's 1990. Okay, so this is an interesting work because it still has some very valuable information in it, but some of it is of more I would call archival value.
Right.
Because some of the it's in the introduction. It basically does. It outlines its thesis, and the thesis is why comics should be studied. It's part of an early. I'm not saying it's the first or anything, but it's part of an early entry to a conversation in academic circles about why comics matter, why they should be studied with academic rigor, why they have cultural value, and why even people should even expand on their form. What's really fascinating is in the introduction he mentions that we don't have the tools yet to discuss the forms of comics. What's fascinating is that 3 years after the publication of this is McLeod's Understanding Comics, who
Right.
then introduces to the common public a whole bunch of terms that people can use forever.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things, like I first became interested in this book. I'd
Mhm.
seen it somewhere around and I sought it out to look at because I get so annoyed with people pointing to, and you and I have had this conversation, to Scott McCloud as like the forerunner of comic academic studies, right? And I can't after our many discussions, I cannot disagree with Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics is not. I hesitate to call it a seminal work, but it is a transformative work in the fact that it uses the language and the tools of graphic art and graphic storytelling to explain the way the graphic storytelling works, and it's transformative, right? It really is. I mean, I as much as I hate to say it because I find him insufferable.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. He can be.
It's the tool that he created in that book is virtually unmatched.
Yeah.
The closest I have found to anything like that is Mort Walker's Lexicon of Comicana, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even that only touches the edges of what Understanding Comics brings to the reader as far as understanding the language of comics. And that was like published in like 78 or 80. And it's hilarious too, because Mort Walker is just a funny guy. But it's transformative in the discussion of it. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Ing's book is that he intentionally is drawing those parallels between the comic strip and the comic book, and how those
Right.
they're not the same thing, but they're not entirely different things either. And if we're going to discuss this as an object of art, the same way that France has begun discussing this, then we need to understand that we're dealing with a unified communication and storytelling system. And I think he may have been the first person to say that, or at least publish that. Yeah, I don't know, but he may have been.
I don't know about first, but I'd be careful about that. But I will
Well, yeah.
say he's part of an early
Mhm.
part of that conversation that is justifying comics, and he's in the same time frame as McLeod, which is fascinating. Is to put them in, and again, McLeod is also doing a similar thing. Hey, comics matter. We should study them. They're part of that early justification period in the comics field, where it's like you're justifying the study of it to academics. So they say, yes, take it seriously. So in addition, speaking of McLeod, I did you include that because the MC Gaines piece is almost word for word what McLeod does in the latter half of
Right.
Understanding Comics with the caveman bit.
Mhm.
It was eerie. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, McLeod
Well,
must have read over this bit when he did
I
his little
inclu- I in-
illustrated.
I included it because I thought it was fascinating to hear from the guy that kind of invented the comic book, right? And also I didn't realize like how like interwoven Gaines was in comic books, right? Like so, like I went back into some of the reading, not necessarily in preparatory. I just sort of like followed a couple of rabbit trails this weekend, and I did not realize that, like, okay, so he publishes the first like 4-color funnies, and he introduces Dell to Western Publishing, and they wanted to get into the funny book business. And then he was for a time a partner with All American that became National, right?
He's bought out.
Yeah, and it was like bought out is more accurate. Yeah, but I mean, just like he was like in like all of these like little pockets of the New York comic book scene, like brought on as a technical advisor or hired as an early editor, and then he went off and he's like, this has been fun, but I'm going to do my own company, and he started EC, right? So it's just like this guy was everywhere. So he wrote what is that article is considered to be one of the first essays on comics as a.
It's 1942. It's really early. It's like
1942,
Superman had just come out. Wonder Woman had just come out. They were brand new, which is fascinating to think about. Hey, this new thing that came out. It's called Wonder Woman. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, and he passed away in 47. Right, he had unexpectedly in 47. So like just 5 years later after this article, and the impetus for writing that article was that he was actually introducing an art show of comic art going back to Winsor McCay and up through the current day at the time. So it was like one of these things where it's like
but the way he describes the caveman stuff is how McLeod illustrates it in Understanding Comics. That specifically the caveman thing. Oh, when the caveman wanted to like do art, and I was like, I feel like McLeod illustrated what MC Gaines. It was an interesting overlap. I had not seen that connection.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this work is part of, like I said, that early conversation about comics, and it's I think a good historical read for that reason. In addition to like what it's saying about comic strips, it's also cool to kind of see it as a piece of scholarship about the medium. It's a little outdated. By a little, I mean a lot.
Well, it's 1942.
No, I mean like Ing's work as well.
Ing's work as well. Yeah.
So like it has to be understood
web comics haven't even existed yet.
Right. So like there's a certain but some of its commentary on like the history of the form, I think, is valuable. Like I said, that New Yorker chapter was quite good. But it is interesting
that'll never change.
Right, yeah. It's just interesting to like I said, put not just what he says in historical context, but like his work itself in historical context. So like I said, it was a very interesting read. As he says, hey, we should study comics. We don't even know how to talk about them yet. And like it's like in 3 years there will be a very widely accepted reference, in addition to the one that Will Eisner ends up doing that McLeod kind of builds on himself on. So like within, like I said, around the publication of this book, the conversation is starting. it's all interesting, and I think connects to this also very, very old strip that we're talking about. Um, that being said, I feel like we have strayed a bit from the general thesis here about why the I guess positive and negative impacts that this type of comic, The New Yorker, has had on both comics and culture. So I know, Reese, when you rage baited, you have more to say on that. So
Well,
why is this particularly, again, today, ruining things?
Well, and like I said, the I think the biggest part of it is one of the issues that I have with this aspect is that the elitism that comic strips and the New Yorker at the top of that heap of comic elitism. It so spoke to, I guess, the frustration in the comic book circles, the redheaded stepchild of the American comic arts, right? To be seen as legitimate, to hold up certain examples of the form as oh, look at us, we're grown up now, comics not just for kids anymore, right? And so you have decent but overhyped things like Mouse, like The Dark Knight, like Watchmen, right, that are certainly exemplary, but they're not like even the pinnacle of what comics, comic book comics can be, right? And but but because those appeal to the New Yorker audience, because Watchmen got on the New York Times bestseller list.
Mouse is a
right?
good example because I know that Spiegelman has done New Yorker stuff. Like he
Yeah.
speaks, like Mouse is in New Yorker Register in a large
Right.
way. Yeah.
And that's actually a really good up. But I mean, there's those things like that desperate cloying for attention. While we can say that the New Yorker is irrelevant today because almost nobody reads magazines and because they're not so funny anymore and because they're all preachy. They were kind of preachy before too, but now they're definitely preachy.
Yeah.
And we've had a shift in society where I think for a lot of years, lots of preachy media was just scoffed off by the populace because it's just like, big city guys are never going to respect us anyway, but that was a funny joke, right? I think in the last 5 years, maybe even the last 10 years, society has moved into the place where there is open hostility on all sides instead of just like closed hostilities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
It's less sublimated.
It's less sublimated, and also the idea that it's just like call me a racist for the 14th time, and maybe there's finally time for fighting words, right? But beyond that, and just like anyway. But one of the things that happened is that these New York-based companies, and then LA-based companies, Broadway or Hollywood, in order to appeal to the New Yorker fan base, they've given up in many ways, not in all ways, certainly, and not in all books and not in all writers, but they've given up telling stories for the mass populace in a lot of ways. And we can make a discussion that maybe it's come back around, or this particular writer never gave up loving the fans, never gave up loving those worlds. You could definitely make a conversation about that on a case-by-case basis, but we don't see even like they're not even, in many ways, Marvel and DC don't even go back and reprint stories that would have that kind of appeal from the catalog, or at least not in a way that makes them accessible to your average, reader, right? They're and it just is like they're wanting to leave. They seem to have left the population behind in order to appeal to this same market of critics that will never respect your comic books anyway. And so And I don't know, and maybe I'm stretching a little much. I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think?
Yeah, what do you think of New Yorker?
I don't have a particularly high opinion of it. But
Care
I don't
to
hate it
care
either.
to elaborate? Okay, I was gonna say.
No, I don't think I have much to elaborate on. I just don't particularly have a high opinion of it.
No, seriously, why do you not have a high opinion of it?
Well, I mean, historically, sure, right? We look at some of the older stuff. I love the Addams Family, right? But most of the stuff I've ever seen out of it has always been pretentious, just even more so now than before. And like anything that was written in between the cartoons has usually just been dribble. So it's like I get why the type of people who like it tend to like it. It's just like, it's a thing. I get it.
Well, you're definitely not the audience, Metal. They're going for.
Absolutely not.
There's something so fascinating about the fact that the New Yorker is one of those things where it's simultaneously culturally ubiquitous and simultaneously culturally ephemeral. And it's like there's any one of these strips that you're showing here would be, if you go down to any college, one of these is going to be on somebody's wall or on their door. You know, before you enter the professor's office, a New Yorker strip's going to be, on someone's door. They have that kind of power to just show up anywhere like that, or in an office.
Well, if I may,
And-
don't all one-panel comics have that power?
True, but I think the New Yorker can be said to be particularly, good,
Pervasive.
pervasive. And not only them, like I said, Far Side shows up a bunch too. But I'm like the New Yorker for, like I said, for culturally elite people or culturally well-read people, New Yorker strips are going to show up in that office, in that on that office door. That being said, despite their ubiquity, when we started this conversation, I know I've seen dozens of New Yorker strips. I couldn't, for the life of me, like distinctly remember one where I was like, aha. That one is one that's like really sticks in my memory. If you ask me what my favorite Far Side strip is, I could name probably like, at least 2 or 3, if not half a dozen. But if you ask me like that
not
one,
just cow tools.
right, exactly, yeah, obviously. But if you ask me like for like extremely memorable New Yorker strips, that's a much harder ask. They're so, and that's what makes there's something about them that, like I said, although they have this position of legitimacy in a cultural register, they're so freaking forgettable.
Although
It's so hard to remember them.
Well,
I
and-
am going to
and-
point out an exception here.
Okay.
Once again, Charles Addams really stands out.
Mhm.
And I am sure you can name some of your favorite strips of his,
Not,
right?
I'm
Especially if they're Addams Family.
saying I'm mostly talking in general about the New Yorker.
I know.
I'm not,
that's what I'm pointing out. It's like he really is a unique thing for some reason.
Sad
No,
Robot
yeah.
says maybe
You
that's
can
because
look-
there's so many of them. It's possible. I'm not
I feel
exactly
like
sure
if you
why,
know him
but-
well, 30 times tonight already, you know the slideshow has passed one of his, and you'll be like, "Whoa, there's something different about." Oh, it's his, right? Just
right.
in the artwork alone.
And he's
There-
and he,
I think
and he
it's
had a
also,
really powerful-
You talk about audiences too, even though this is probably the type of area where Twitless among all of us would probably see the most. But like New Yorker strips are the ones that you're far more likely to see on the wall in like maybe the literary department of a university, while like Far Side you're probably going to see in like the engineering department.
Well, I know that in the if you go to a business, that's where all the Dilbert comic shows up. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
like no kidding. But at the same time, like even with Dilbert, I'd say there's probably a few of them like that really stick in my head. And for some reason, maybe it's just a personal thing. Maybe it's just I don't jive as much with the New Yorker register. But like they just fall right out of my brain most of the time,
Yep.
unless one like
Well-
offends me. Like if, like I said that the airplane one like offended me, so that one stuck. But a
Well,
lot of
and
the
I
others,
think part of it,
the-
I think some of that actually does come to Jim's comment here. The problem with the New Yorker today and Hollywood is the lack of any sense of humor in things that are supposed to be about humor. They're humor strips. They're not comedy, right? So they're always for the most part. A New Yorker strip is a chuckle. It's not going to be a guffaw. So it doesn't always have that kind of a pinch. And then when you could be offended by the lack of humor, such as in your airplane one, which is just mean spirited.
Yeah, that one's just nasty.
Yep. So, but yeah. So anyway, so of course I was over speaking with saying that it was ruined, but I do think that the elitism of the New Yorker is proof. You're not wrong with what you said, that it's a proof of the cultural power of the comic strip. Absolutely. But it is also indicative of a motivating force that I think encouraged DC and Marvel to sell out their fan bases for applause. You get that's how you get the Invincible Squirrel Girl made by the Dinosaur Comics guy.
Well, I think that's just more of they started hiring the same type of people. Is more of it, like people with the same mindset.
Okay, that might be a different tack on it.
I'm going to push against that maybe a smidge, because I think there's another register. Because you're right that they traded in, but I don't think they traded for the New Yorker. They traded in for the Comics with an X crowd. Like artistically and content, like they went for like the I think they started to go for like the sort of like Harvey Pekar, Crumb type goodness gracious,
Spiegelman.
Why do I blank on him? Spiegelman. So they kind of like went, I think, for those guys because it was like because they were like subversive, and the New Yorker crowd is just so milk toast, and it's just like it's almost bland, and I don't think they traded in for bland. I think they traded in for subversive, and I think that speaks more towards them going towards. And when you see some of the modern stuff that they do, like some of the modern like Marvel, DC, or even Valiant, where it's like, wow, this really looks like it's from Comics from an X. Like they got someone who speaks in that register.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of Marvel, DC that went for this register.
Okay, I can see that, except that as you mentioned earlier, Spiegelman was already in the New Yorker circle.
Yeah, okay,
right?
So there's some bleed over. I
feel
it's like a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Well, and even Pekar, and I love Pekar, right? But Pekar, by accident or whatever, ended up rubbing shoulders with a lot of these New Yorker types. He hated them, but he rubbed shoulders with them pretty regularly.
I should have left Pekar out because Pekar is a writer. And Pekar is very much in the sort of mundane, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Let me think. I have to think this through. I do think that I don't know. I would need to see more compelling evidence about that makes me say that they traded for the New Yorkers. I just, like I said, the New Yorker people were never interested in the comic books, and I don't think that Venn is as strong.
Right.
I think I agree with you. I think what they did was they ended up getting similar types of people who were in different circles, right? Mm-hmm. Where like they have maybe general sentimentalities that are the same, but from like typically a younger crowd who were more interested in other things.
Right. Well, and let me finesse my opinion, just my statement just a little bit here, because I'm not saying that they got any of the New Yorker crowd.
Oh no, I know you're right. I know it didn't show up.
Right.
I'm
saying I think that they were wanting that legitimacy, right? That there were even in the subtext of, which is one of the reasons I find it so insufferable. Even in the subtext of understanding comics, there is this please, sir, please take me seriously, sir. Please, sir. Please, sir. I'm a real artist, sir. Please take me seriously, sir.
I don't do comic books. I make graphic novels.
Yeah, exactly. And this pedantic attitude toward calling them, graphic arts or graphic novels instead of calling them comic books, and forgoing the industry terms like trade paperback for collections, where it's this idea that
I will actually defend slightly, just a smidge.
I like the term graphic novel. Actually,
I think it's fit. I
just don't like the people who used it.
I love comics. If you ever try to approach any database for research, anything, even Google, and you try, comics is such an unwieldy search term. So when it comes to archiving and trying to find stuff, the minute you try to type comic or comics or whatever, like the amount of conflated results you get is maddening, and it's just it's. I love
I like
comics.
having
I do.
more words to
So
describe
you're
things,
making
right?
you're making a library sciences argument.
I'm
for
just
it.
saying
Hey,
it
you know
is
what?
rough.
That's
You know what, I can
categorical,
attest to this.
taxonomical.
Yeah, it's not
Because-
not fun.
When I was
I like
in college,
OGN to describe things that were all like submitted in that format originally.
Right.
I think it's a good category.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I was at. I mean, I mentioned once in passing that I was a comic artist, and the next week somebody asked me, "So where do you do your stand-up?"
There's so much overlap. There's so much overlap when it comes to that.
Well,
Uh,
and that's why, for the last 12 years, I've been recommending people use the term comicer, right?
I envy the
Yeah,
French.
it
The
doesn't help.
French are because the French use the term for the form, and our
Mhm.
form is conflated with genre. It's
Right.
such
Yeah.
it's a never-ending nightmare.
It's true. You're not wrong about that. But I also, so there are okay. I must concede there are practical reasons to go with the graphic novel, even though many things.
I just don't like the
graphic
people who
novels are
started
really
pushing
not
it.
novels at all.
No, I get it. I
That
get it. No, I
makes me
understand it.
angry deeply.
It's it's completely
so-
insufferable. It's
Yeah.
completely correct.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the pain I go through every time I try to search
Yeah.
comic is
Yeah.
is
What
palpable.
annoys,
We've got like
annoys me is
5
if
or
you-
6 different things that are all comic in our language.
Right.
The other thing that annoys me is that if you go to a bookstore, you'll see these 3 sections. Here's the comics, right, and then next to it is the graphic novels, and then next to it is the manga, and all the graphic novels are just anime.
Oh, that's a perfect comment. I saw a
Right.
comic
Yeah.
about murder once. It was very graphic.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the language problems in a sentence right there.
Yeah. That's great. So,
Cartoonicus hasn't weighed in on the New Yorker yet. We need to get his opinion on it.
oh yeah.
Haven't done that much reading of it, so all
You don't
I can
have to.
say-
It's just the general cultural imprint.
What's your
it
gut
has.
say?
Yeah.
all I can really say is getting back to the fact that if it weren't for them, you wouldn't have the Addams Family, and so if you are a fan of them, thank them for that. I don't know. The thing is, with all these different kinds of people, having their own snobbery against everybody else, right? And nowadays, AI art comes along, and I'm like, you know how the superheroes and supervillains and everybody else all put their differences aside to stop the alien invasion? If you have picked up a pencil for the first time in your life, all right, I am on your side. Because at least you're doing something.
I was actually going to say, it'd be a really fun thing. We could give ourselves like a really long deadline, especially because some of us here aren't artists, but also look at some of these New Yorker comics. So you don't really have to be an artist to draw one of these. But it'd be really fun if we all went out to make something that like a single panel that was actually intended to be funny, but also as pretentious as we possibly could make it, just as an exercise.
Oh my.
That's great. Yeah, that's a matriarch. I mean, a monitor duty contest. I'm gonna formalize that. I'm gonna put a cash prize on it. That's great.
I put the American cheese on pizza.
Oh,
why do you have to say things like that, man?
I'm like I'm like an 8th degree smug. Lord.
Yeah.
Like, I got this in the bag.
It's like, especially because like artistic skill is not the most necessary thing about it. I think the wit and the experience is going to matter a lot more.
Yeah,
I'll have to figure out a group of judges, and see if we can't do that. But yeah, I'm gonna put a cash prize. It's gonna be a small cash prize, but it'll be a cash prize for the winner. But yeah, that's gonna happen. That's too perfect.
All right, here's the challenge though. You can't just use, a straw man. Whatever you do, has to still fit within your personal beliefs.
Well, how can you actually
Right?
judge that though?
You
Yeah,
have
that-
to
that's
find
no,
what-
no.
I think we just want to judge the content of the comic itself, interpreted by the viewer.
Yep. The reader should be able to know nothing about you and still get the comic. So, okay, that's it. That's the show. Because I don't think there's anything else we could possibly say about the subject. I do
I
want
don't know,
to
I
Actually,
feel like
I did
Pritless
want
could
to say
keep
one
going.
thing, if I may.
Oh, please.
I almost forgot that, because well, the question is how the New Yorker ruined comics, right?
Yeah.
And then we've always had this idea how 9/11 ruined comics.
Yeah.
Because all the comic artists were in New York.
Yeah.
So how did 9/11 affect the New Yorker?
That's a research project I'm not going to do. Yeah, that would take a whole different.
I don't know.
It makes me think, right?
I don't think. See, the question. My gut instinct right off the bat says. I'd actually have to look up New Yorker cartoons.
Right?
9/11.
We want to look at it this way, though. It's
Let me
like
see.
comics are basically a property of New York. So, taking them out of New York also kind of diverses them from their original culture. But as things change, that is just watching the cultural change of a medium.
So the thing that I'll say is that the reason why I always say 9/11 ruined comics is because of superheroes. You can still have what the functions of the New Yorker. In fact, I would say that the New Yorker actually gets stronger in a period like 9/11 because it's sort of like smug, comfortable, biting satire actually becomes a comfort zone. The problem that 9/11 did to superheroes is the fact that it erased the foundation upon which they were built, which was projections of American power. And American power had just taken, in the minds of a lot of Americans, one of the biggest blows it ever got, in the heart of the people who created it and believed in it. And you don't, like I said, you don't have to believe in all those things to be sardonic about life and death. Like I said, if anything, it increases it. So if you just Google some New Yorker cartoons from 9/11, you get some very touching, or in some cases, biting satire. And so, like I said, I think the New Yorker gets stronger in its
It's
ability
almost like
to
group
do-
therapy for everyone in New York.
It can do its job better, I think. But with superheroes, it's like we believe in this thing that saves the day, and the day isn't saved. I can look at the ash down the street, and that's psychologically, So I think it does some. So good question. Good question.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, that's a whole research project. It really is. But so, well, yes, that'll be it. Next week, Batman. I'm not sure what Batman, but we're talking about Batman. So if you enjoy hearing about Batman, tune in next week. In fact, the next several weeks might be bat heavy.
Okay.
I don't
Lowest
know.
views we ever get.
Is it really?
That's surprising.
I thought
I
Batman.
know the last
always-
Batman one didn't feel like many people tuned in during the show, but I mean the views were fine afterwards.
Yeah. Batman always gets good views.
So, anyhow, that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because I want to talk about Batman. Because I love Batman.
All right.
At least old Batman. New Batman makes me sad. That's the show, guys. Until next time, get out there, read some comics, and keep an eye out for next Monitor Duty. We are signing off.